We can't keep acting out without our patrons. To become a patron of the show, no donation is too small or insignificant. Please do visit patreon.com/actout. This week on Act Out, fracking, fires, and methane leaks, oh my. The geeks are watching you, and here's a solution to solve all of student debt. Finally, the strike in West Virginia may be over, but the fight continues, and not just in that state. We dive into details, good and bad, and the possible rally growing from roots all over the country. West Virginia teacher Brittney Barlett joins us as well to talk backstory, aftermath, and the road ahead. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Brigade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. A noise flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I awoke next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. Some headlines to start off this week's show. First up, people like to talk about fracking and fracked gas as a bridge fuel that burns cleaner than fossil fuels and can therefore carry us over on an imaginary bridge to the cleanest of fossil fuels, ideally before we all choke on toxic fumes. Problem is, of course, that that's bullshit. LNG might burn cleaner at the end stage, but getting it to that end stage is in many ways far more toxic than even traditional fossil fuels. We've covered fracking quite a bit on the show, so frequent viewers will recall stories such as farmers' livelihoods destroyed within a single day of tree clearing, toxic sludge spilling into neighborhoods, fracked liquids poisoning water wells, leaking into freshwater creeks, gas leaks causing sickness and even death, sinkholes and explosions. Earlier this month, at an oil and gas drilling pad in Ohio, gas backflowed, breaking the blowout preventer, which led to fires and explosions, spewing thousands of gallons of toxic chemicals into the air and a nearby stream. But Eleanor, this is news from February. Why are we talking about it now? Well, because the leak just stopped last week. March 6th, 21 days after the initial blowout, the XTO well, a subsidiary of ExxonMobil, finally capped the leak, but not before the well had a chance to spew methane gas at a rate of 100 million cubic feet per day, rivaling the 2015 Aliso Canyon leak in California. And unfortunately, this well wasn't covered by safeguards currently in place because it's grandfathered in under current laws, a common theme for many old oil and gas wells across the country. Also quite common are workarounds to regulations that seek to mitigate the amount of methane we're pumping into the atmosphere. And keep in mind that methane is 30 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse warming gas. So practices such as flaring, which is venting methane from oil and gas wells on purpose, or indeed unintentional leaks from pipelines, processing plants, and other infrastructure are going on constantly with little to no oversight. Meanwhile, there are no national standards for publishing oil and gas data, so while organizations like Frack Tracker do their best to document the number of wells and their status, the true environmental and human cost of these projects is essentially unknown. But to learn more about this issue and to find the methane leak closest to you, visit fracktracker.org. Up next, if you've ever wrestled with your computer, you may have called on Best Buy's Geek Squad to help. Well, it seems that while they were tinkering with your laptop, they were also conducting warrantless searches of customers' computers. EFF filed a FOIA request that revealed that the FBI has been working for several years to cultivate informants in Best Buy's national repair facility in Brooks, Kentucky. The aim? Conduct searches of the customers' computers and alert the FBI to any illegal or potentially illegal content. So beware the smiling face of a geek squatter. Find a local tech expert that's read 1984 and doesn't think it's a good idea instead. Final headline today, a memo drafted last month under Secretary of Miseducation Betsy DeVos argues that student loan servicers and debt collectors should be exempt from state regulations and oversight. The argument is that these damn kids need to pay back the money that they took in order to educate themselves, and if they don't, our economy suffers, and therefore the capitalists in chief have every right to use any means necessary to make sure that their fucking yacht gets sponge painted this season. After all, the student debt business is a $140 billion a year industry, and thanks to the deregulation of the industry and the buying up of government loans by private companies, student debt is a huge cash cow for Wall Street. And despite what DeVos's memo implies, the government oversight of student loan repayment is actually just laughable at best. Indeed, they actually pay to ensure that Wall Street gets paid. In 2011, the Department of Education paid out $1.4 billion alone to collection agencies and other groups to hunt down student loan defaulters. And yet somehow, our economy just isn't thriving thanks to the harassment of college grads. Meanwhile, a recent study sheds light on what might actually get our economy to thrive: student loan forgiveness. That's roughly $1.48 trillion, which sounds insane, right? But according to researchers at Bard College, it's actually the only sane thing to do about this growing problem. Millennial-led households are poorer than any other generation before them, with a smaller spending capacity. If you're my age, you don't know a lot of people your age who own a house, for example. Borrowers commonly work multiple jobs outside their field of study, creating an ever-growing pool of young adults with mediocre incomes, mountains of debt, low standards of living, and few abilities to give back to the community, fiscally or otherwise. Meanwhile, the Bard study found that canceling all student debt in this country would create between 1.2 and 1.5 million new jobs and increase the nation's GDP by $86 billion to $108 billion per year over the next 10 years. Wow, it's almost like investing in people rather than investing in oppression, war, extraction, and destruction kind of pays off in the long run. Indeed, Wall Street bankers are the only players in this scenario that don't come out on top, to which I say, it's about fucking time. Moving on, but still rather on the subject of students, you probably heard about the teacher strike in West Virginia that ended last week with a deal for a one-time 5% raise. You may even have heard amid the cries of victory and yay unions, some mutterings of a different story. Well, that's what we're diving into right now. It's important to note that a raise isn't even what pushed teachers to strike in the first place. What they were after was actually better health care, something that the Public Employee Insurance Agency, or PEIA, wasn't delivering. A one-time 5% raise with funding pulled from other public services was certainly not on the teachers' list of demands. And while there's some question as to whether or not the funding will include Medicaid, the governor says it won't, Senate President Mitch Carmichael said it will because, quote, Medicaid is always a part of the budgeting process, and so that we, frequently move Medicaid money around within the context of the budget. And frankly, the budget that's being brought forth has Medicaid cuts to it, so there will be, additional areas of the budget that must be cut. No, Mitch, I really don't know. But thanks for the appropriately vague, stereotypical politician answer. So again, while it's unclear exactly where the funding for that raise will come from, it is clear that it won't come from tax increases on the wealthy or a cut to coal subsidies that prop up an anachronistic, homicidal, and dying industry. Meanwhile, back at the original point of the strike, a 23-person task force was created by Governor Jim Justice in order to address the PEIA healthcare issue. And I get it. Healthcare reform is not easy. It takes time. So who are we working with on this? Well, according to the list released last week, we've got insurance companies, unions, politicians, and one retired public educator. One retired public educator. A retired public educator who has as much representation on the task force as the Division of Highways. Now, if union leaders had shown utmost support for their current teacher members, the task force wouldn't feel nearly as lopsided. But that's just not how it played out, either before or during the strike. Linda Thompson, president of the West Virginia School Service Personnel Association, said in a video from late January that we, quote, do not advocate a strike, and even compared a strike to the disease yellow fever, saying that that's what you call it when you can't see school buses on the road. She argued that members should give legislators time, but that ultimately it is up to the members to decide, which, of course, as we know, they did, and the strike began on February 22nd. But then on February 27th, unions announced a deal with Governor Justice and told teachers to go back to work on the 1st. But that move ultimately backfired, and the strike continued. Finally, a closed-door deal last Tuesday ended the strike with mixed feelings of pride and disappointment. For more from the front lines of the fight, we sat down with West Virginia high school English teacher Brittney Barlett. Take a look. First off, what were the conditions that led you to be a part of the strike?
So I would say that the catalyst for the strike was really the Go 365 program that was introduced with our PEIA insurance. So basically, the tracking and the demands made were kind of unethical and crossed a lot of boundaries. And I would say that really got everyone upset once they figured out what the real rules of that were.
So would you say that the 5% raise wasn't a primary concern for going on this strike?
I would say initially it wasn't a huge concern, but it definitely brought people's attention to the fact that we are, 49th in pay, and a lot of people weren't aware of that. So I think once the unions helped us understand where we stood, that started to become a bigger issue.
And talk about the PEIA, the Public Employee Insurance Agency. How does your healthcare work through that system?
So, PIA is what almost every state employee has as their insurance. So I mean, it's nice to have insurance through working for the high school, but at the same time, it kind of limits you in what you're able to do. So each year they have a board that basically is appointed by the governor, and they make decisions on our insurance plan, what qualifies as, something that you can get covered through the insurance plan. And so those keep changing over time, which I think is the issue. Yeah, I just was sick last week and found out that my copay had raised from $10 to $20. And I mean, it just consistently, things like that changing constantly is really a big issue for us.
We're post the strike. So how do you feel about the deal?
I am pretty frustrated by the way that everything went down. I feel they just waited 9 days to give us almost less than we asked for in the first place. There was a lot of bickering and party politics amongst the different branches of government. There was a lot of hatred of the Senate versus the governor, the Senate versus the House. And in the end, they position themselves to come out on top no matter what. So the Senate claims that because they were so fiscally responsible, they were able to give the raise to other state employees, which makes them look, positive in the eyes of other state employees. The House didn't, vote for us initially, but as soon as the governor made the deal, all the Republicans voted unanimously for the deal. So I think the optics of the whole thing was really frustrating. I was actually in the front civilian row of the signing with Governor Justice, and he had all of these delegates behind him, none of which had been on board with us from the beginning. It was just pretty frustrating. My whole drive back home, I was pretty upset. I don't mean to sound, not grateful for the fact that I got a raise, because I'm pretty excited, but at the same time, we got a $2,000 raise, and Oklahoma is currently striking for $10,000. So by comparison, we kind of got the crumbs.
So going back to kind of how this all played out, talk about the relationship with the union and their role in all of this.
Right. So it was really just individuals kind of mentioning, hey, did you hear about this Go 365? I saw something on Facebook about it. And then people started reading more and more. And I didn't actually join a union until all of this started. This is only my second year teaching. I didn't feel that I needed it. And then when all of this started, I joined AFT. And the unions worked in tandem. And basically, once we started getting upset, started hosting informational meetings with us, basically just saying, hey, this is where we are. We have these programs. People seem to be frustrated with them. We have hearings with the finance board, and they, if you want to come and voice your concerns, you can do that. So they encouraged us basically just to get educated and involved. And I don't think they realized when they showed up, because I was at one of the very first meetings that they had, how upset the people were. And it actually turned into the union saying, whoa, slow down. We don't want to strike. We don't want to do anything like that. That's a last ditch effort. I'm pretty sure if they'd given us the vote, it probably would have gone a lot faster than it did. But they wanted to give the legislation time to, come forward and do what we wanted them to do before it came to that. So the unions were very responsible, very thoughtful in their steps they took, and did end up making some concessions. Like instead of fixing PEIA, we had a task force. Instead of they had initially started to ask for a 5-5-5 raise, so we would get 5% 3 years in a row, and we only got the 1 year.
So with regards to the deal that was struck, was this something that you had a chance to look over and vote on with your fellow teachers?
No. And I think that was a huge issue, that the deal was made in one meeting instantaneously. And I feel that they probably didn't know how bad of a deal they made until they got out of the room. Now, that's just personal opinion, but I think from like watching the feed and seeing how they are behaving when they come out, they're realizing that what happened shouldn't have happened, and maybe they shouldn't have made the deal. We never voted. The meeting was incredibly private. No one knows what happened in there. So I'm wondering what was said to lead them to make that deal and ask us to go back so quickly. And obviously, based on Senate President Carmichael's reaction, he said it's not going to pass the Senate. We won't go back. So. But we never had a chance to vote on it or say whether we agreed at all. So
going back again, talk about the various roles that were taken during the strike, because one of the things that has come up as a question, like services available for kids that might need them during the course of the strike, were any of those kind of things available?
Oh, yeah. That was our absolute, first priority is always students. I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy, but really as teachers, that's the first thing we think of. So before we even knew we were going to strike, like when we were still talking, we were having informational rallies and stuff, we were already taking donations of food, anything that they might need, just in case it ever happened. So my school, I'm pretty sure before the strike even happened, we raised over $1,000 in food. Even programs within our school, local community organizations donated. And then throughout the strike, every rally, we allowed people to drop off food. Student organizations, church groups packed up food and delivered it to students in need. So basically, counselors indicate students that they feel might need that. And it's a very disturbingly large percentage around here. And then other counties had family resource networks that are excellent, and they, delivered meals to people that they felt needed it. Churches set up daycares, and students knew, I have students through a Remind app, which lets them communicate with me for homework purposes. Any of them could have contacted me at any time if they needed anything. And I made sure that they understood that if you need a place to stay, if you need anything, just contact me. So we were still always there for our students, keeping up with them, messaging the ones that we were concerned about. So.
And with that, what's been the response from the students now that you're back in school?
Well, as a high school teacher, they are not as excited about being back as the young students are. But they've all been incredibly supportive. I can tell there are several of them that aren't, don't agree with that. But they've been incredibly supportive. They were really proud. I ran into several of them down there. They would say things like, "Hey, I saw you in the paper. I saw you on the news. Your sign was really cool," things like that. So I think they're just interested in it. They're kind of, I don't know, kind of impressed with us, I think, that we all organized and decided to do this. That's kind of the feeling that I've gotten from them.
So, looking ahead, what are the plans for the future since this deal that you mentioned that you feel frustrated about it? Are there plans to move ahead and push again for these things, possibly strike if that's necessary?
There are no plans for that whatsoever. I mean, I have never in my life been as stressed as I was the last 2 weeks, just not knowing what the next day will bring, not knowing what sorts of messages you're going to have on your phone when you get home from angry people. some people were kind of harassing us. Mostly it was almost all positive, but still every negative comment kind of hits you deep. I learned a lot about government that I didn't know. My plan is to keep learning about that. I was just trying to watch the Senate live feed before I was talking to you. Some of us are planning on going down Saturday, actually, and watching how the budget bill plays out, because that's the last day of legislation, and we want to see if they've made even more cuts or changes to where our raise is coming from, because they're not necessarily incredibly forthcoming with that information. And I think a lot of us are planning on staying on top of them. If they make their public task force hearings for our insurance, open for us, then we want to attend, continue to email them and stay on top of it. So I think just waking up and staying involved in government and getting people out to vote in May and November is going to be the best thing. The task force is our biggest concern right now, considering they're in charge of deciding whether insurance gets funded or not. We're going to keep pushing that severance tax, but they don't have to fix it until December 1st, which is conveniently right after general elections. So we're going to make sure we're staying on top of them. That's what all of us have been talking about, is that we're not going to let this unity die, not going to make this attention and our eyes on Charleston. We're going to stay there.
And would you say that you trust your government to make the right choices, or would you say that the only way that they will make the right choice is if you stay on them?
I definitely think that. One clear example of that is that the second we left the building on Tuesday after the signing, they tried to push through 2 education bills. One of them which dissolved an arts program, basically the Governor's School of the Arts, and there's a youth government programs, things like that, were all housed under this organization. They dissolved it and threw it under the State Department of Education, just told them, this is yours now and you're in charge of it. And they said, so it's still there, it's still fine, but I don't know, I haven't found out if they're still funding it the same. And the State Department couldn't answer any questions because they don't know anything about the programs. And Energy Express is a program that feeds a lot of kids over the summer and is a volunteer organization. And these have been around for a long time and are incredibly positive for students. And so that's become an issue. They did a lot of other things Paycheck Protection Act during the strike. They tried to push that through, which basically prevented unions from taking dues from our paycheck. There was definitely a lot of retaliation, definitely a lot of movement as soon as we left. So we know that they're not too happy with us, and they're really looking to start charter schools and homeschool vouchers and stuff like that. So right now I would say no, we do not trust them. And that's why we're going to keep watching.
So final question, what would be your message to other teachers or even other people who work for the state? What would be your message to them in terms of what you've experienced?
You mean other states that might be pursuing the same action, like Oklahoma? I would say absolutely 100% go for it. I think it's time for people to keep their eyes on their government, to understand what's happening to them, to know what's good and bad for them, and vote based on that. Look at voting records, not just who you know or what they say. But somebody said, one of the delegates said that I think it was Senator Ojeda. He said that they poked the wrong bear because teachers are smart. Teachers know how to research. And so especially a teacher organization, we are telling everyone we know exactly what we know. And so we're helping people understand what's going on. And I think, Oklahoma, California, Arizona, who are moving towards these actions as well, there is strength in numbers. And you can achieve a lot more than you think you can. And it's a pretty powerful experience. And I think it's really, hopefully, maybe started something.
And indeed, it does look to have started something. A few days after the strike ended in West Virginia, teachers in Oklahoma readied themselves for a strike asking for a $10,000 raise over 3 years. Again, teachers in West Virginia got a $2,000 raise over 1 year. Graduate student workers in Illinois went on strike and occupied the president's office at U of I with signs such as this one, noting that the Christmas bonus for the president was $100,000, while a grad student's annual salary is barely over $16,000. In Kentucky, teachers rallied last week and threatened to strike. Hell, even nurses in California are feeling inspired. The California Nurses Association made an announcement last week authorizing a strike in the face of Kaiser's ever-growing profits and ever-dwindling levels of care. West Virginia may not have been the victory that many had hoped for, but it was a step that lit the dormant spark of strikes that once made workers a force to be reckoned with in this country, and a step that raised a flat estimation of a throwaway state in the minds of those outside and inside. As Britt Cooper, a Lewis County school psychologist, put it, the fight was about the betterment of West Virginia, my home. It was about proving that we are more than coal, gas, and haulers. Our children and our teachers are worth more than whatever is left over after gas exports, tourism, and tax cuts. If called to stand again for my colleagues and friends, would I? Absolutely. A person's a person, no matter how small. Dr. Seuss taught us that when you work together, you can accomplish great things. Keep shouting, and they will hear you. 55 strong. Amazing things happen when you recognize your power and combine it with the power of those around you in working towards a common goal. History shows us that, as well as recent history. These strikes and the power that they ignite, even once they pass, will be how we build together, how we liberate each other. As Black Panther Kilu Nyasha once told me, fighting for liberation liberates oneself. And with that dose of inspiration, we'll wrap up this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. Heads up for those of you in Austin, I'll be performing at Monkey Wrench Books on March 15th. For more info on that, visit artkillingapathy.com. As always, please check out the last slide and the show description to find sites mentioned in this week's show. And for interim updates as well as posted videos, images, and articles, visit us on social media. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left for nothing, motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been backing up inch by inch, we got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since you pushed us on my show.